Welcome to the International News Daily Podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Dunicic, bringing you unscripted, unbiased, and objective news on a daily basis. Typically, we would cover 3 different events going on a global level. However, today is very different because of a historic event occurring. We're only going to cover this event, and that event is the Taliban taking over Afghanistan and rushing the capital city of Kabul. We are going to cover what is happening, why is it happening, and what is going to happen in the future, or what could potentially happen in the future. I am not the Oracle of Delphi and I cannot see the future, but we'll make a try. So let's start at the very basics. What's happening? What the hell is happening? This month, US President Joe Biden announced that all US troops would be withdrawn from the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan at the end of August, this month that we're currently in. The Taliban took this as a cue to march and to surge on the Western-backed Ashraf Ghani government. In a matter of days, not months, not weeks, but days, the Taliban were able to take over province capital after province capital, eventually taking over the main capital city of Kabul, becoming the nation's de facto leader and declaring the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. So the first question many people ask when they're learning about this issue, when they're asking, what's going on, is they ask, why is it happening now? The United States has been in Afghanistan for over 20 years. Why didn't this happen 5 years ago? Why didn't it happen 10 years ago, 15 years ago? It has a really simple answer. Because the United States was there. This happened for one simple reason. United States troops began to withdraw from the Republic of Afghanistan. It doesn't get more complicated than that. But to give you more historical context, to not be so basic, as they say, we want to give a lot more historical background. The Taliban have ruled Afghanistan before. This is not their first rodeo. It's not their first time ruling Afghanistan, and it's probably not their last, right? If they lose power again, they'll probably get it back. So let's go back to 1996. The Taliban originally took control of the current government forces at the time, instituting what was also at the time called the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. This government was very traditional, very conservative. It followed a hardcore Sharia law basis. And this was not a problem for the United States from 1996. It wasn't a problem in 1997. It wasn't a problem in 98, 99, or 2000. It wasn't even a problem in 2001 until a group called Al-Qaeda decided to carry out the September 11th attacks. Shortly following these attacks, United States President at the time, George W. Bush, announced the War on Terror, where he famously declared, "If you aren't with us, you're against us. If you aren't with the United States, you're with the terrorists." Afghanistan, run by the Taliban at the time, would provide refuge to Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda committing the attack on September 11th, being harbored by the Taliban in Afghanistan, was obviously problematic. The United States decided that it was within its best interest in the war on terror to invade Afghanistan. Within a matter of months, the Taliban government was removed from Kabul, being pushed to regional provinces, being essentially made into farmer warriors, losing their governmental status and fighting a guerrilla war against the world's greatest, at that time, only superpower, the United States. The Taliban had footholds, but at the beginning it had nothing. So how did the Taliban go from being virtually completely defeated, disbanded, humiliated, disgraced, to resurging, to retaking Kabul, to retaking the capital of Afghanistan in less than 20 years? Basically, what happened was US priorities changed. Within the war on terror, the United States had to invade more than one country. And as invasions got more complicated, we began to have to, not we, we're independent News Daily, but the United States government had to begin to focus its priorities in different countries, primarily Iraq. When the United States began to focus more resources, time, soldiers, money, etc. on Iraq, the Taliban began to resurge, slowly gaining a presence in outskirts and provincial capitals and in basically the outer areas of Afghanistan. Over time, this influence would grow and it would become harder and harder to contain. Even with allies such as Hamid Karzai running the Western-backed Afghanistani government in the Republic, it was difficult to contain these forces. After some time and some elections, Hamid Karzai would step down and his successor Ashraf Ghani would take over. This would lead to a period of very high contention and also from a domestic perspective, United States domestic perspective, the people of America quite simply lost interest in this war. They began to ask, why the hell are we over there? Why aren't we helping our people? You have to understand the United States was spending billions of dollars every single month, arming, feeding, training the Afghani government forces to be able to defend itself from the Taliban. We were spending more money on our soldiers being there, fighting the Taliban, losing their lives, giving their lives to fight the Taliban to prevent the Afghani government from losing control. And Americans had enough. Finally, former President Donald Trump would come to power in 2016, which would eventually lead to that administration, President Trump's administration, reaching a peace agreement with the Taliban, stating that the United States would withdraw its troops in the year of 2021. This peace agreement would also state that the United States military had limited options in responding to Taliban military forces, basically being a peace truce and basically allowing the Taliban to take over Afghanistan. President Joe Biden virtually had no choice but to follow through with this. He probably wanted to as well, but we're not going to go into details and opinions and partisan politics, but President Joe Biden also chose to follow through with this and began withdrawing these troops. The next question people ask is, knowing that the United States government invested trillions into this war over a period of 2 decades, much of this money, in fact, most of this money, ending up in the hands of the Afghani government. The Afghani government, Western-backed forces, that government running Afghanistan at the time. How did this Western-backed government force, trained by U.S. soldiers, financed by the United States government, fed by the United States government and provided weapons by the United States government, lose so rapidly to the Taliban forces? The answer is simple, and there's really only 2 answers. A very large amount of corruption and a very small amount of morale. Afghani commanders receiving United States aid and funds were very corrupt. They would state that they had more soldiers than they had, requesting more funds than they needed to buy things that they never bought. Instead of buying weapons, food, and whatever equipment they needed for their soldiers, they would take the money for themselves, their tribesmen, or their families. Much of this money did end up going to the correct source, right? So the Afghani government forces were not completely unarmed. They had helicopters, tanks, weapons, everything they needed, equipment. But the reality is these soldiers simply did not have the morale to keep fighting or fight for what their vision, if they even had one, of Afghanistan was. For 20 years, it was just a huge stalemate of corruption, of what happens, and their morale compared to the Taliban's extremist, fanatical, religious, jihad, and mujahideen mentality could not stand a chance. It simply could not stand a chance. So that's how the Taliban were able to take over so quickly. Corruption and a lack of morale. So what does this mean for Afghanistan? As we can see by the events that occurred today at the Kabul airport, where 7 people died trying to flee the Taliban. 7 Afghanis died, Afghanistan citizens, lost their lives trying to flee the Taliban because they jumped on airplanes and unfortunately fell from those airplanes while they were taking off. Obviously, many people in Afghanistan are fearing for their lives. And they do have a historical reason to do so. As mentioned before, the Taliban government, which ruled Afghanistan from 1996 to 2001, was pretty radical. It was under Sharia law, which, depending on culture, is a good or bad thing. That was not really the issue, but it was very draconian, very strict. Many people did lose their lives. Things such as women not being able to attend school, not being able to go to the workplace, not having the right to protest, to speak their minds, thieves having their hands cut off, people being executed by form of lapidation or stoning, scared many people. You know, this is a form of government that scared many people. To the credit of the Taliban, they have stated publicly multiple times that this government that they intend to make wants to be an inclusive and Islamic one. They have stated that they are more moderate, that they have changed, and that they are a more modern Taliban. Whether or not this is true has yet to be seen. What can be said is, in their takeover of Kabul, no major abuses have been reported or alleged. As of so far, it seems that the Taliban is following through on its promise of a more modern Sharia or Islamic government, but only time will tell. The most major concern is, at least that's been happening in the media, is what about women? What happens to women? I don't think historically, in modern history, any government has had such a strict or, let's say, oppressive approach towards women's rights as the previous Taliban government of 96 to 2001 had. As stated before, women could not attend school. They could not work outside of the home. If they wanted to go out in public, they had to be accompanied by a male guardian, which means either their father, their brother, or their husband. And it would ideally be their husband. That was heavily implied. In addition to this, women had to wear a completely all-covering burqa, right? So even their eyes could not be visible. This is something that even in modern Islamic countries, or let's say even the most conservative Islamic country, the most conservative Islamic country in the world today, which this can be compared to, would most likely be Saudi Arabia, right? But even in Saudi Arabia, women have a right to go to school. They have a right to a career. You will find women in the workplace. You will find women driving now. That's a new thing. But they're used to it. They learn how to drive, right? Women are more or less different than men, but they have some type of civility or some type of form of equal rights to men. This is not how the former Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan from 96 to 2001 under Taliban rule looked like. It was very strict, and women certainly had an extremely oppressed level in society. So what happens now? The Taliban has openly stated that they are not opposed to women being in school, which is a new, let's say, step up or a new stance for them. In terms of women in the workplace, there really have not been new statements on that, so we're just going to have to wait and find out, right? I can make my own projections, right? And our official projection would be this. I do believe that the Taliban will be more moderate. It will be more progressive, if we want to use that word. It's of the highest importance to the Taliban that it receives international recognition. Not receives, but maintains international recognition. That it does not lose this recognition. That it is not attacked or hit with trade embargoes. That it maintains an open country that's ready to cooperate on the world level. This is absolutely of most importance, of the most importance to the Taliban government if it intends to economically survive. What needs to be understood in the future is another threat of terrorism. Before, the Taliban harbored Al-Qaeda, though in their agreement with President Trump, they agreed to fight Islamic terrorism. And there is currently, in Afghanistan, extremist Islamic groups, designated terrorist organizations, present. Small cells of Al-Qaeda, which are today significantly less relevant, but what is a threat are cells of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIS or ISIL, Daesh, whatever term you prefer to use, is present in Afghanistan. The Taliban have fought with these forces before, and they've done so successfully. But the Taliban now have to focus on governing. This is an organization, a force, that has known nothing but fighting for the last 20 plus years. They have not been governing a country in the last 2 decades. They have to maintain this while also maintaining peace in their emirate, in their country. That is another threat that exists. And it's a threat that United States forces and officials are very skeptical of, right? The first being the Taliban's ability to contain these threats, and number 2 being their willingness to contain these threats. Will the Taliban want to contain Islamic extremism? Will it support Islamic extremism? As it's stated, right, we can only go from official statements from here. We can't make conjecture, we can't jump to conclusions, and we should give people the benefit of the doubt until they work against that benefit of the doubt. The Taliban has stated that they will work against Islamic extremism and terrorism. That has been seen in terms of their fighting against ISIS and ISIL, but at the time, that was more so fighting over territory and not over a difference in ideology. So that will be seen. We've covered women, we've covered terrorism, and we've covered the future of Afghanistan. It's a very complicated situation where it's really hard to say what will happen, but we can guess. We can say that it is in the interest of the Taliban to try and attempt to ensure that they maintain international recognition. It is in their interest to have international cooperation. It's in their interest to have their own free republic or emirate or whatever they want to call it. At the end of the day, Afghanistan is a region that has never been able to fall under foreign influence. The Romans have tried and they have failed. Different conquerors have tried and they have failed. The Soviets tried and failed, and now the world's largest, historically most militarily powerful superpower, the United States of America, has tried and failed. This has shown and brought up Afghani morale. Whether or not they support the Taliban, it shows a resilience to be independent and to resist. What does this mean for the United States going into the future? It will definitely decrease its position in the world and its standing in the world. Many people have compared images and videos of helicopters taking out people fleeing the capital of Kabul to images, videos, and recordings of helicopters taking out people fleeing Saigon in 1975, when the United States pulled out of Vietnam, which until now was its greatest military loss in history. Many would say that this is a repeat of Vietnam and that things are looking bleak for the United States. I would say this much. The United States lost Vietnam in 1975, and it was an international embarrassment for the nation. Nonetheless, the United States was able to win the Cold War and come back as the world's only hegemonic superpower. Just because you fall does not mean you cannot get back up. The situation seems bleak for the United States, and it certainly is, but I do believe that the US will find its way to reclaim its spot as one of the world's major leading superpowers. But it has a lot of contenders. See you on the next episode of International News Daily.